All right. Yeah, so we're doing chapters 1 to 8. And of course, the last one we did when we got back at the beginning of January was Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And in between Voyage of the Dawn Treader and the final book, The Last Battle, we have the Silver Chair. Silver Chair is referenced in this because in that book, Eustace comes back to Narnia and he brings a schoolmate, Jill Pole. And so we have them reintroduced. So Jill Pole is kind of a new character, and there's an entire adventure that is under their belt that informs this adventure. So if you haven't read Silverchair, it is worth reading, but of course, they're designed to be standalone stories. And of course, not only is this the final book of Narnia, but these are the last days of Narnia. And that's how this book begins, in the last days of Narnia. And I know when I read that, I thought, ooh, that must have been an interesting sentence to craft. Okay? The last days of Narnia. So it's interesting. And I'm going to allow people to jump in, but one of the things that we've noticed is that the children, we've seen the Pevensy's children in these stories, and then slowly they haven't been able to return. So first the older two couldn't come back, and then Edmund and Lucy were there for Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but that was the last of their adventures. Eustace is able to come back, but now we're not able to come back either. So to a degree, we have outgrown Narnia and maybe need to look for Aslan in our own country, as the older children have. Any thoughts about the first chapter? By Cauldron Pool, we're introduced to two characters, Shift the ape and Puzzle the donkey. What do you think about their relationship, these two?
It's kind of toxic.
Toxic, yeah. The word not yet invented, but yes, that's probably a really good description. So unpack that a little bit. What are you seeing that is, shall we say, problematic?
Well, it's very one-sided relationship, really. The ape is just using, this is how I see it, using Puzzle for his own ends, and not treating him very well in the process, and making him feel, bad about himself whenever he does try to stand up to the ape a little bit. He, really puts him down, tells him he's stupid.
Right.
And yeah, so
a little bit of Sorry, say that again.
I didn't like it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Shift is clever, and that is his power, particularly since Puzzle is relatively not very clever. So he is certainly susceptible to Shift's argumentation. Shift is very quick. And again, it's kind of in the name, right? Shift and Puzzle. He's able to adapt very quickly. Puzzle says this, so be fair. I let you do the things you can do. You should let me do the things I can do, right? And Puzzle, who doesn't quite get it, he's always puzzling over what's being said, isn't able to keep up, and so falls victim to somebody who's much quicker thinker. So these two one day see something come down the falls, and Shift, using his power over Puzzle, desires it and sends Puzzle in to get it. Puzzle almost drowns in a very well written scene of drowning, because he's pretty desperate there for a minute. And it turns out to be a lion skin. Do you think that Shift has his full-blown idea right away? To what level? Because there seems to be a moment when he's thinking, he says on page 11 in my edition, is that kind of edition? He says, now I wonder, for he was thinking very hard. So, what level of plan do you think Shift has here?
The sentence before was then a wicked gleam, or a couple sentences before, then a wicked gleam came into his eye.
Ah, yes.
That suggests that there was that was a change.
Right. Right. So, and that seems to go with the line, it's a lion skin. So, yeah, there seems to be some sort of plan, or at least the seeds of one. How can I use this?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that innocent? Is he evil at this point? What's happening?
I think it's how can I use it for my benefit? He's certainly not thinking about puzzle.
Okay.
So I don't think anything's innocent.
Okay. So if we were going back to something like Mere Christianity and talking about virtues and vices, what's happening with Shift right now?
I think he's learning to use his cleverness for manipulation.
Right.
And the more he uses it, the better he's getting at it, right?
Right. Right.
Now, how can I use it for my gain?
Right.
Greed. He's
Greed.
greedy.
Yes. So we are on a path here. We are on a path.
His first thought too isn't reverence, that it's a life, like compared to puzzle, that it's a lion, even if it's a dumb, not talking lion. Puzzle says, well, it is a lion still, a wild animal, and because of Aslan, there's some reverence, but Shift doesn't have any reverence, or this is a life lost, or
Right.
recognition, or it seems of that at all. It immediately goes to use.
Yes. So in some ways, two things. One, we have some difference in worldview going on here. One is selfish. Puzzle is thinking much bigger, much broader. He has, and that's the second thing, he's actually more clever than he believes and he thinks of himself, because he's able to say, well, wait a minute, this is a lion skin. Aslan is a lion. And the fact that Aslan took on that skin means that this too is somehow made sacred. So there is intelligence, there's logic there, which we'll hear a little later. Eustace gives him a bit of a chiding a little later, to the point. It also tells us something about us, right? If there's parallels in our world, the fact that Aslan is a lion, and therefore all lions somehow share in this sacredness, what does that mean in our world then?
Jesus took on flesh, therefore we look at flesh, each other, as something different.
Right. Yeah, so we bear this image of God, and God bore our image. So it's this kind of double sacredness. Yeah. So I think Lewis is kind of speaking into his day. Darwinianism is flourishing. People are animals and that kind of stuff, and there's classes and things like that. And I think that Lewis is maybe giving some speech into that kind of thinking that could be helpful. But, of course, Puzzle is berated out of his thinking. He's sent off while Shift swings in and begins to prepare the skin.
I thought it was interesting that the dwarfs had taught him how to sew.
Okay.
Only because I've read the first 8 chapters, and later there's a scene with the dwarves who, and in past books, quite often the dwarves, you never really knew what side they were on
Right.
and whether they believed in Iceland or not.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, especially I think we saw Nickabrick, the black dwarf in Prince Caspian, was very much interested in power. Could be the witch, it could be Aslan, whatever was going to win the day and make the dwarves' lives better.
Yep.
So again, there's a bit of a theme of doing what is right and good, right? So Puzzle seems to have this sense of this skin is solemn. It's an animal, even if it's not a talking animal, it should be buried. There's a sense of right there. Perhaps there was something in the dwarves teaching Shift how to sew. Maybe that was a kindness, but maybe it's a kindness that has gone awry. There's certainly something crooked in the ape's heart. And again, I'm guessing that Lewis chose an ape pretty intentionally from his context. And so Shift has this idea. What's the idea with the lion skin once he gets it onto Puzzle? You look wonderful. If anyone saw you now, they'd think you were Aslan, the great lion himself. So what's the plan?
Everyone would do whatever you told them.
Mm-hmm. And Puzzle says, but I don't want to tell them anything. And then here is the most nefarious line, right? But you think of the good we can do. How does evil begin? I think of even Adam and Eve. Eve listens to the serpent and looking at the fruit and seeing that it was beautiful and was good for food, took it and ate it. So the whole thing starts to unravel with this, which I think you and I would say is really false. Because again, we know Shift's character at this point, right? He's not interested in doing what's good or what's right. He's interested in selfishness, in greed. This is all about him. So maybe that's why it's such a surprise when we get into the next chapter. Because did you think to yourself as you read the first 2 chapters, wow, how did we get from oranges and bananas to cutting down forests and killing the wood nymphs and selling the talking beasts into slavery and dwarves into the salt mines? Like, was it shocking for you at all? just that leap, I guess we could say.
Yeah, it was pretty fast.
Uh-huh. So what might Lewis be saying to us about that? Looks like Carol's
Wow.
trying to mute, maybe. That is having trouble.
There.
Ah.
It's a slippery slope. You
Right.
slide down very, very fast.
Yeah. The bottom
So
comes
you
up.
go from plotting good to being deeply entrenched in evil very, very quickly.
Right. So kind of the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
That,
And maybe we can't get to good results using false means.
Mm.
And even, I don't know if you guys watch any of the political shows, but that's often the kind of choices they have to make, right? Do I kill this person to stay in power so that I can continue the good that I'm doing?
mhm.
Murdering somebody so that they can hold on to their power so that they can, and it's really not, but the good that they're doing for others. Again, it's that selfishness. So yeah, it goes quick. So it's only 3 weeks later. The last of the kings of Narnia. So again, Lewis reminds us that we are in the last days, and now we are meeting the last king. So we didn't read the first book chronologically, which was The Magician's Nephew, where we saw the first king, King Frank, and his lady Helen, who again are referenced in this book. But we are now meeting the last king. He's a descendant of Caspian and Rilian. Rilian's from the last book. He has this beautiful friendship with his unicorn Jewel. And they have heard the news that Aslan is in the country. And they are just overjoyed. It's interesting, again, if we are listening for parables, think of Jesus's words to his disciples. When they tell you that the Christ has come, don't go running after that. Don't go looking for signs. You'll know when he comes. So, but there is this question as well, right? Because wisdom, and this is a medieval Renaissance kind of theme, you have to keep the passions in check. So your passions can overrule your reason. So reason must always rule the passions. And so Jules says, if they are true. So it's not that he disbelieves, but he wants to allow reason to play its part and not just lose his head, as it were. But talking creatures have said that they have seen Aslan with their own eyes. So there is interest here. But then comes a centaur. And the centaur has some very bad news. He has been reading the sky. And he says, Runewit, the centaur says, this is a lie. Aslan is not back. This is a lie. Pay no attention to the girl behind me. So we have evil signs and portents over Narnia for the last year. The centaur is warning the king as a result. Then we have the first instance on page 20 of my edition. I wonder, said Jewel, whether Aslan might not come through, though all the stars foretold otherwise. So they're trying to reason this. So this is a question about epistemology, the study of knowledge. How do we know what we know? We have eyewitness accounts saying Aslan is in the country. We have a centaur who is good and trustworthy, knows the skies, can read the signs, and he has said flat out, this is a lie. This is not Aslan. So they're trying to figure out, how do we balance out these two reports? I wonder, said Jewel, whether Aslan might not come, though all the stars foretold otherwise. He is not the slave of the stars, but their maker. Is it not said in all the old stories that he is not a tame lion? Well said, Jewel, cried the king. Those are the very words, not a tame lion. It comes in many tales. So it seems to me that what we have here is a case of convincing ourselves that something is true that we want to be true. So again, in kind of the fantasy genre, I shared years ago with Carol about a fantasy series that I like called the Sword of Truth series. And the first book is entitled Wizard's First Rule. And the wizard's first rule is that people are stupid. They will believe what they want to be true or what they are afraid is true. So they're not looking for the truth necessarily. A wise person looks for the truth. A foolish person wants to be told what they want is the truth. And there lies the difference. So here we have, okay, so even if the stars are saying something, isn't Aslan's very nature, his character, why would we think there has to be consistency? And again, remember that in that cosmology, everything beyond the moon is considered stable and influencing for the good, because it is fixed, and it's below the moon that things are impermanent, fickle, changeable. And so that is here being laid aside. So there's some foolishness going on here in their desire for it to actually be Aslan, to have Aslan walking in their day. So this is, in my opinion, wishful thinking that is becoming problematic. So the earlier wisdom of, if it is Aslan, has now been put aside in favor of, well, he's not a tame lion, so couldn't he do whatever he wants? So we are getting rid of some wisdom in order to have wish fulfillment. And then suddenly we have a wood nymph crashing through towards them, calling out, whoa, whoa, whoa. Again, we have scripture, book of Matthew in particular, here. And they're felling the trees in Lantern Waste. And then, of course, the dryad is dying. So a plan is made to go raise an army. And then the king and Jewel go on, and they see the destruction as they go, what's happening. And they are now hearing that these things are Aslan's commands. So there's something very wrong here that should be cluing them in. But again, they have opened themselves up to the lie that while it's true he's not a tame lion, that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a consistent character. And so if it doesn't seem like Aslan, they should not believe that it's Aslan. And yet they keep going with this hope.
Mm.
I'm just kind of making commentary as we go here. So if you have something, do feel free to jump in.
Is the sky then, is that almost sort of like the word, like if somebody says something like, you should check it against the word, the three-legged stool, the Free Methodist against experience, the word. Is that what that's kind of like? Is that what Lewis is kind of referencing or suggesting, that if you read something that you should check that against what you've heard or other sources or other?
I think that he is certainly upholding the Reformation sense of reason being an important tool. And so again, I think he's going back to kind of a medieval kind of worldview, which was informed by scripture, right? Like the medieval Renaissance literature, like the Fairy Queen, is all about taking the virtues and giving them a Christian understanding. So, for example, the word unkind, she was a woman who was unkind. That literally means, in that earlier literature, she acted against her nature. She acted against her kind. She was unkind. So it wasn't about somebody not being nice. It was about somebody not acting consistently with who they were. Their virtue was put aside. So I think he's going back to that kind of thing, because we don't have a text in Narnia. But we do have, and again, this kind of goes back to mere Christianity, right? Like he says, well, we can't just start with the text. That does us no good. And we can't even just start with the creation. That does us no good. Where we have to start is something that's in creation and also somehow outside of creation. And he starts with a human person, right? And he says, okay, we notice this about us. And he begins to build his whole argument for not just God, but for this particular unfolding of God in the world. It fits the evidence best. So I think he's kind of commenting on that there is a rationality to this stuff. So I don't think he wants Christians to check their brains. So, and we have the advantage of, we do have the text. Now, we have a lot of copies of the text, and in our days, a lot of resources to help us read the text. Right? But there's always the temptation, both of Satan, the world, the flesh, and the devil. Those are all still there, right? And that desire for wish fulfillment to be true what we want to be true, right? God must wanted me to do this because now I've got this Porsche. The sign justifies whatever I did to get that money, and hashtag blessed kind of thing. So there's always the temptation to put aside what we know, put aside revelation. And I mean, that's what Romans is about, right? The beginning of Romans, they exchange the truth of God for a lie and worship the creature instead of the one who created them. So that's always what sin is at its heart, is we cannot trust God, or I won't trust God, even though he's in fact trustworthy. Does that answer your question okay? Okay, good. So they get there. They see the trees being chopped down. They see calormens, for some reason, at the heart of all of this. And then when they realize that this calormen is beating a talking horse, I mean, it's bad enough if it's a real horse, but a talking horse, this is beyond its dignity. And so their passion breaks loose, which is always problematic in the Renaissance literature, right? Like that's their failure. So this is vice that breaks out. So sin leads to more sin here, and they murder. So they don't, you see in the next chapter, when they calm down and their reason comes back, they say, what did we just do? We didn't give them the notice of defiance. We didn't challenge them we just killed 2 unarmed men after taking them by surprise. That makes us murderers. There's no virtue in that. And so they do the virtuous thing, which is hand themselves over to Aslan's justice. Does that make sense? Because in our modern kind of storytelling, we probably think their response of seeing the calormens beating the horse, that what they did was virtuous, defended the horse, right? That's kind of how we tell stories today. Oh, that hurt, you defended. So is what I'm saying making sense?
That whole the simile to me is Moses took justice into his own hands and then felt that same thing, that remorse, and
Right.
God took care of him for 40 years.
Right. Right. Or he was trying to avoid God for 40 years.
Yeah, that's
Is it
right.
necessarily keen when God showed up? Said, I've got an assignment for you. What?
Wake up.
Yeah. You crazy? I'm happy here with my sheep. So yeah, so this is we got some virtue stuff, especially as the king, right? So again, there's sense of responsibility. So it's not that the king didn't recognize his responsibility, he did. There's just that needs to be balanced with some other things, which is to deal justly with other people as well. So we get into chapter 3, and we have the ape in its glory. So they free the horse, they find out what is going on, and again, they're told it's by Aslan's order. How could that be true? How could Aslan be commanding such dreadful things? And they reinscribe the line, he is not a tame lion. How should we know what he would do? So this kind of down to Ben's question again, right? Should we know the character of God as his people?
Yes.
So it's interesting what's going on here. The hope has turned into wishful thinking, and now we have confirmation, right? So it's kind of closed the loop. Oh yeah, because he's not a tame lion, he could say anything. I mean, he can, and so they actually support this nonsense. They worry that this, in fact, when really, what should they know at this point?
Well, at the very least, they should know something's very wrong.
Well, they do know something's wrong. They also think that this could be Aslan somehow.
Yeah, well, but it doesn't make sense because they know who Aslan was. They've heard all the stories. This is absolutely the opposite of what Aslan's ever done in the past.
Right. Have you ever met Christians like that? They crucified Jesus last time, but when he comes again, he'll be the one doing the crucifying. Do we have a consistent idea of who God is as he is revealed to us in Christ Jesus? The fact that he's not a tame lion, does that mean that he can just do anything? I mean, we've read the old stories now, right? The Narnian stories. When they asked Aslan, why do we have to keep your word to the witch? Why do we have to obey the magic of the table? You think I can go against myself? Even Aslan with Lucian, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I didn't really make you appear. He says, don't you think I would obey my own magic?
Mhm.
So again, because the creation is built with dependency and consistency and order, we must expect to see orderliness from God. And when disorder and chaos comes, we should know this cannot be of God. And so, in order to regain some of their virtue and therefore their dignity, Jewel and the King Tyrion turn themselves over to Aslan. And here's a good line. Because Jewel says, you go to your death, then do you think I care if Aslan dooms me to death? Said the king. That would be nothing, nothing at all. Would it not be better to be dead than to have this horrible fear that Aslan has come and is not the Aslan we have believed in and longed for? It is as if the sun rose one day and were a black sun. There's some beautiful imagery there. And so if this is true, then it's better that I'm struck dead right now anyways. So that would be a mercy then. So they give themselves up. They're taken. And now we have the scene with the ape and the Narnians. What has the ape done to himself since we last saw him 3 weeks ago?
10 times uglier.
10 times uglier, right?
And more human,
Sorry?
and more human.
More human. Could you explain what you mean
Well,
by
he's dressing, he's put clothes on,
that?
and
Right,
they don't fit too well.
right,
And then he wants to decorate himself.
right. The man's sword.
Like the things, if you see an ape in a zoo and there's something that they can play with, they'll put it on.
Right.
So he's becoming more like a person,
Right.
which is disconcerting.
Or maybe less like a person. Since it's earlier as he makes the attempt.
Yeah.
We also have again the distinction of virtue and vice. So Tyrion and Jewel have handed themselves over to meet justice because in receiving justice, there's a redemption for them. They are restored, right? If they can accept justice as just, then they are restored. I hope that makes sense to you. It might be hard because it's a very different worldview than what we have today. But the Calormans say, by our skill and courage, and by the permission of the great god Tash, we have taken alive these two desperate murderers. With skill, these guys handed them in, like gave themselves up, right? So we've got this deception all around here. And we have this we said at the end of chapter 1, the idea is for the ape's own greediness. And that greediness has just reached a proportion that we are damaging Narnia to such a degree. And now we're wiping out the squirrels' colony's store of nuts. Poor little squirrels. And of course, think of Lewis's day. You got this ape cracking nuts in his cheek and spitting out shells. I mean, you wouldn't find that on Downton Abbey, not even downstairs. I've been binge watching Downton Abbey again. And so Shift is doing to the Narnians what he has practiced doing to Puzzle for so long. He is able to pivot very quickly and turn situations into his advantage. And so when a boar says, why can't we see Aslan properly and talk to him? When he used to appear in Narnia in the old days, everyone could talk to him face to face. So there's a memory here, Narnian memory, which is important. So to go back to what Ben was talking about earlier with the kind of the Wesleyan quadrilateral, we have tradition and experience is playing a part here. We should know Aslan because we have access to the old stories. So we know when Aslan shows up, he comes face to face and he talks to the beasts. He doesn't talk through somebody. He shows himself. There's revelation. What we have here is disguise, hiddenness, mediation. So again, we could have with this, Lewis may be trying to have kind of an Old Testament, New Testament type of distinction, where the Old Testament is mediated through stone tablets and through Moses, and Moses through a veil, whereas we see Christ face to face. Not a big deal if that's what he's saying. But the ape refutes this very quickly. Even if it was true in the past, times have changed. We might think not for the better. He was too soft with you before. He's not going to be soft no more. He's going to lick you in the shape this time around. He'll teach you to think he's a tame lion. So this rationale. So we first encountered it in the king in Jewel. We don't know if it started there, but somehow that same thinking has gotten to Shift, and he's able to use this and adapt it for his purposes, right? Now it is used as an accusation. You want to try and make him a tame lion, and he's not going to let you. And so there's moaning, there's whimpering, there's silence. And then he says, I'm not an ape, I'm a man. And he just looks like that because he's such a very old man, and it's because he's so old that he's so wise. That's why Aslan has chosen him. So everything in the lie fits together. And again, I think all of you participated in the Revelation course. So think about the beast and the dragon come together. The Antichrist. We certainly are picking up themes of this. And there's this falseness to it, right? So right even down to Shift's being, we have this falseness. And again, it's the wishful thinking. He wants to be a man. He's not a man. He's an ape. He's a talking ape. And that should be good enough for him. That should be, and he has a responsibility as a talking beast. But he, again, in his greediness, he's making himself more of a beast than ever. and he breaks the news that Aslan has sold Narnia into the Tisroc's hands. The Narnians are to become slaves to work. But of course, he wouldn't use that language. No, they will be paid, and their pay will go into the treasury, and that treasury will be used for the benefit of people. There may be some commentary on socialism here. Communism was not very popular at the
And
time
the Catholic Church.
in the Catholic Church.
I think
Okay,
there's a strong cord of the Catholic Church in there.
okay, okay. But again, there's this sense of no, how the beast, it can't be true. Aslan would never sell us into slavery to the king of Clorman. So again, they're saying these things, but they are continuing to put themselves under the power of the lie, even though to some degree they are recognizing it as false. So we kind of have this study in how, well, again, people are stupid. They believe the lie because they're afraid of that it's true, or they want it to be true. So these guys are afraid that this lie is true, and so they believe it, as opposed to saying, concluding, no, this can't be true, and I'm going to stand up for the truth.
He also starts mixing. It seems like Aslan and Tisroc become agreeable, or they seem to get kind of mixed.
Oh, Tash, the god of
Yes.
yes, that is where we go next. So is there a difference between the god that the Narnians believe in, Aslan, he made the stars, said Jewel, so they would have no power over him. He's not a tame lion. So Aslan is definitely their god, and the Clormans have this god, Tash. So the lamb brings it up. Now, again, what's the significance of this being a lamb?
Symbol of Christ,
Symbol of Christ.
Lamb of God.
Yeah, and we've seen in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Aslan take on the shape of a lamb. So again, another revelation picture, right? Lion and lamb, both playing a part here, without this lamb being Aslan. But the lamb is astute, sees something, asks a penetrating question. If we belong to Aslan and they belong to Tash, how could Aslan be friends with him? And so, of course, the ape is angry. Baby, silly little bleeder, go home to your mother and drink milk. So that's usually a good sign that the person is losing an argument. They have to resort to name calling. And then he says, that old idea is all wrong. And there's this kind of attempt at this enlightened perspective. Oh, it's just silly, to think there's Aslan and to think there's Tash. No, there's none of that. It's all, different names for the same person. Aslan is Tash. Tash is Aslan.
Hmm.
And the look on your dog's face. They all have it. But we're introduced to a new character, a ginger cat, a big Tom, who begins to clarify. And he begins to understand what is going on here. And we start to see that this cat and the Calorman captain are going to make friends here and begin to grab some of this power for themselves. So where the ape may be clever, Ginger seems to be cunning. And for the first time, Tyrion speaks, and he says ape, so he won't undergird the lie that the ape says that I'm a man. You lie damnably. You lie like a Clorman. You lie like an ape. And he meant to go on, ask how the terrible god Tash, who fed on the blood of his people, could possibly be the same as the good lion whose blood all Narnia was saved. There's the difference for Lewis. There's a report that one day some colleagues of his were together talking about the world religions and trying to come up with the distinction and between Christianity and the others. And Lewis heard the question and he said, well, that's easy, grace. Everybody else, you get what you deserve. Karma, what comes around goes around. Christianity, you don't, you get grace. But they deal with him appropriately for their purposes, knocking him down and silencing him. And so he's not able to break the power of the lie. That takes us to chapter 4. He is tied up. There are some beasts that come and feed Tyrion and give him drink. And he's still not sure about Aslan. So he's still asking questions. They saw him, they saw Aslan come out of the stable at night. But can you really be doing this to the wood nymphs and making you slaves? And they conclude he's come back very angry this time. He must have done something dreadfully wrong without knowing it. He must be punishing us for something. But I do think we might be told what it was. So they go. They leave him. And he can see what's going on the hill. He sees the Aslan come out. He sees that it looks odd, walking very stiffly around the bonfire. And he has his doubts, but he is saved from those doubts by remembering the nonsense about Tash and Aslan. Knew that the whole thing would have to be a cheat. So again, he's starting to get back into his right mind, as it were. And he begins to go through the stories. And again, the memory is important. The stories are important. You could say the scripture is important, right? Scripture is an oral thing until it is codified and written down. So he goes through the scripture of Aslan's relationship with Narnia, the times that he's appeared. And so he cries out for the children and for Aslan and children from another world. They have always come in when things were at their worst. Oh, if only they could now. And he called out, Aslan, 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 come and help us now. And he's willing to sacrifice. So again, we have a very Aslan-like thing. Let me be killed for the sake of saving all of Narnia on page 45 of my edition. So not only is he now remembering about Aslan, not only is he able to distinguish the truth from a lie, but kind of like St. Paul, right? In chapters 9 to 11 of Romans, kind of like Moses, after the children of Israel make the golden calf, he places himself in between the wrath of God and the people of God, and says, you know, I would be willing to be cursed if they could be rescued, right? And that's what Christ ultimately does for his creation. So is this Christ-like gesture, this Aslan-like gesture. He is, and he's tied to a tree here. So there's some beautiful imagery going on here. He cries out, children, children, friends of Narnia, quick, come to me across the worlds. I call you, I, Tyrion, king of Narnia, lord of Cair Paravel, and emperor of the Lone Islands. And immediately he's plunged into a dream that is not a dream and is more vivid than any dream he's had in his life. And he sees this group of people sitting around the table. They see him, whereas they're clear and have substance, and he can hear them. They can see him in kind of a ghostly apparition kind of way, and he can't make his voice work across the void. So they get the sense that he's Narnian, they get the sense that something's wrong, but they're not actually able to communicate. Anything you want to comment on from that chapter? I feel like I'm doing a lot of the talking, so I apologize.
Well, just like the worldliness kind of came out, you know, going back a little bit where the ape wanted, you know, bring me more nuts, bring me food, bring me, you know, all these things. And you go, you know, he was in a very simplistic way, he was being selfish that he wanted these things, these fruits, you know.
More, give me more.
You know, and again, how does the world operate? And its agenda is you should have more, you should have more, you should have more, it should be easier for you. It should be the comfort, you know, that whole slowly slipping down,
Right,
getting what you want.
right.
And maybe that's what Lewis is trying to bring through again to us to see.
Yep.
That's how the world operates. That's what it's doing to you.
Yes, yes, yes.
And
Yes.
again, like you say, then you're, you know, even though you see it, it smells wrong, it tastes wrong, everything, but you're sort of lulled into something.
Right.
You know, and it also said when that lamb was challenging the ape, that the ape spat at him.
Yes.
Well, my word, you know, anybody would, you know, why would you do that to an innocent lamb? That smells wrong right away.
Right.
If you spit in my face, said you're wrong, you know, well, what testimony would that give to anyone else that would see that?
Right.
You know, deception, you know, it's wrong. But
Yep.
in this case, they were just lulled away into, you know, he's not a tame lion, you know.
Right.
I think I would have been jumping out of my chair.
Right. Well, and it makes us wonder, because again, this is partly because it's the last days, right? In the last days, we will call evil good and good evil.
Mhm.
And so it's the inability to recognize the truth from a lie, or the lie from the truth, and to live accordingly. That is partly because it is the last days. That's what makes it the last days. So it kind of maybe raises the question, what signs are we not seeing ourselves?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the days we are living in right now, what are they going to be 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 2 weeks from now? How do we know?
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's a parallel that he's definitely drawing to the last days.
Right. It looked like Ben had something he wanted to share.
This is interesting, just hit me going back that when they try and equate Aslan and Tash. The king's response is like the fruits, like the results of it, not like well, but we believe this and you say that. Like it's not a theological or a philosophical, equation or whatever. It's just like he looks at the fruits of, we followed Aslan, this is what he taught us, and these are the stories of what happened, versus the stories of what happened to people, the results of following.
Well, it comes down to character, right? They're fundamentally different. One demands the blood spilled of its people, right? Tash. So in Old Testament, in the world around the Hebrew people, there was Molech, and child sacrifice was quite common. So one of the arguments that could be made about Genesis 22, the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham to God calls him to. Marvadon says this is a paradigmatic change. They come from a culture that child sacrifice is quite common, and by this moment, that idea is nullified. That is taken off the table. This is an inappropriate way to worship the God of Israel, Yahweh, through child sacrifice. So kind of what Tyrion sees is the recognition that they can't be one and the same because they're diametrically opposed in character. One calls for the shedding of blood of its people, the other shed its own blood for its people, right, to rescue its people. You can't get more different than that. So yeah, it's not philosophical. Again, it's rooted in knowing the character of God, right? So I have heard Christians that have talked about Jesus coming back, leading armies, often from a revelation kind of standpoint, where blood is just going to be pouring in the streets up to the horse's bridle kind of thing. And they say, oh yeah, this is the big Armageddon. It's right there in print. And you got to say, well, wait a second. How does that match up with the God who takes on human flesh and goes to death on a cross? How is that possibly the same character? And that becomes the hermeneutical lens in which to read scripture. Anyways, so yeah, you're right. It's not philosophical, but it is rooted in character. So how help came to the church, to the king, not to the church. It's like almost instantly, Eustace and Jill appear with a big bump. He says, gosh, that took one's breath away, says Eustace. And Jill starts to untie him. And they kind of figure out the time difference for everybody. And so they're here to help. They have some food. And Aslan is still present here by Aslan's goodwill. I was not robbed of my keys. So there's still the sense of Aslan's providence at work in the story. And it is a place of shelter and to plan. So we have the introduction of the two children to Tyrion, and they rehearse a little bit about their former adventure. Now, something that Rowan Williams notes he was the Archbishop of Canterbury for a time, and he did a series of talks on the Narnia books. And we noticed that Susan isn't among the friends that gathered to talk about Narnia. And she's ceased believing in Narnia, and is really interested in makeup and boys and magazines and that kind of stuff. And so one of the accusations that Lewis has gotten is that, you know, he sends Susan to hell because she was interested in makeup. It's not actually the case. Rowan Williams points out that Lewis doesn't deal with Susan, doesn't actually tell us what's happening with Susan. But the reminder that Aslan always meets us where we are. And so we can leave Susan to Aslan's good character. You don't need to worry about Susan. Just in case you were worried about Susan, I thought I would throw that in there. So we have the story retold of how the children were going to get back into Narnia. They put on disguises, they get the rings that were buried from the first book, and they're all set to use them. They're on the train, and then there's a jerk, there's a noise, and they are appeared in Narnia, never having used the rings. Aslan did all for us in his own way without any rings. But this is it. Nobody else is coming. Peter is not coming. Aslan has said that he's not returning to Narnia. So this is the help that Tyrion has. And so again, as we've seen in a lot of these books, there's a sense of adventure. And so there has to be some strategy, right? One king, two children, well outnumbered. There is a small army on the move, but they need to do some planning. They need to do some getting fitted out and all that kind of stuff. So again, we get to see how to store medieval weapons, things that were important to think about, protect the strings and all that, protect from rust. They take on disguises to try and make themselves look like Clormans so that they can move about if necessary. And Jill and Eustace have been training since their last adventure. So they are a little more prepared for this adventure, which is good. And they get ready to settle down, wishing that they all had a drink, tea or cocoa or wine. Anything you want to note from this chapter? Well, they have a short sleep, and it's time to get moving. They have a plan laid out, and off they go. We find out that Jill has some amazing woodcraft. Perhaps she has some Dryad's blood in her after all. And so they rescue Jewel. And this time, Tyrion is courteous and he is virtuous in how he handles the situation. but just as they're ready to turn home, they realize Jill is missing. And so dwarves are coming, Jill is missing, and then Jill suddenly shows up and she has Puzzle with her, still in his lion's coat. And we have some sexist stuff going on. If she was a boy, she'd have to be knighted, wouldn't she? If she was a boy, she'd be whipped for disobeying orders. Maybe a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B. Well, it turns out it's good that Jill is a girl. And again, Tyrion is ready to act rashly, strike off the donkey's head. But Jill uses her reason and her compassion, again, virtue, right? Because no, don't do that. He's a nice donkey. And again, kind of that Aslan sacrifice, right? Standing in between the wrath, the justice to some degree, and the silly ass who really probably does deserve it. And he says, he's addressed, why would you do that? Very sorry if I've done wrong. The ape said Aslan wanted me to dress up like that. And I thought he'd know I'm not clever like him. I only did what I was told. Wasn't any fun for me living in the stable. Don't even know what's been going on outside. He never let me out except for a minute or two at night. Some days they forgot to give me any water too. So they're kind of forced. They need to get moving. But then Tyrion realizes that they now have the truth in tow and he can expose things. And so they head off for the dwarves. And so in chapter 7, he confronts the Calormans taking the dwarves to the salt mines in Calormen. Anything we want to say from chapter 6, the rescue of Jewel and Puzzle?
Puzzle is a classic victim
Classic victim, okay, yeah,
because he doesn't seem to have been tied up in any way.
right,
Like he could have left.
right,
He's got lots of opportunity.
yes,
A certain degree of intellect that he just doesn't use.
right, yeah, I mean, any of the times he was brought out, he could have brayed, right? One, he
Right.
would have just exposed everything,
He could have refused to walk. He could,
Right.
I mean, I can think of 17,000 different things that he could have done,
right?
and he didn't do any of them. He just
Yeah.
stood there.
So what has he done? What's his vice?
Inaction.
Inaction, but that the inaction comes out of kind of a more fundamental thing, right? He's told himself, I'm not clever. And somewhere along here, Eustace says, rather than spending so much time saying how you're not clever, you should be being as clever as you can.
Right.
So really he abdicates responsibility, right?
Mhm.
So what you're noting is he's handed power over to Shift. And even now, to some degree, he's handed power over to these people. You know, Shift told me this, following you guys. That's a great sin, right? To be making excuses, to to not using, even if we have a little capacity, but using that little capacity to the greatest of our capacity is our responsibility, right?
Mhm.
So his sin is not that he's not clever, it's that he is given up responsibility for himself.
Abdicated.
Yeah. And this would be a very different story if he did not do that.
Mhm.
But in some ways, that is a reflection of what's going on, right? So the king says, as the Tisroc fought a great battle, dwarfs, and conquered your land, that you thus go patiently to die in the salt pits of Hugrahan. Aslan's orders, what can we do against him? So they have, again, advocated their responsibility for standing up what's right. To be sold into slavery is not right. But because they've heard Aslan's orders, that has been allowed to be used as the cage around them, right? They have no choice now. They've given up responsibility. So again, Lewis is holding up a mirror to us here, right? What are the things we believe that we think, oh, I had no choice?
You often hear people say that.
Right. Well, and then,
So wrong.
yes, the media, you know, and it happens in real life. Oh, I just loved her so much, you know. I mean, it just transcended my marriage vows. So I just had to, right? I was just so overcome. Somehow the ruling of passion overruling reason becomes virtue today, rather than being seen as a vice. We give up responsibility. I had no choice. I just fell in love. Like that lets me off the hook for acting wrong. Well, we continue. And this time we have a proper fight, not murder. And they flee the dwarves. And Tyrion calls for 3 cheers for Aslan. But what follows is wretched. There was a feeble attempt from a few dwarves, which died away at once. The rest sulky growls. But they understand. What's wrong with you dwarves? The ape isn't going to rule Narnia any longer. And then there's this whole revelation that they're not going to be taken in. So on page 71, we've been taken in once, and now you expect us to be taken in again the next minute. We've no more use for stories about Aslan. See, look at him, an old moke with long ears. By heaven, you make me mad. Which of us said that was Aslan? That is the ape's imitation of the real Aslan. Can't you understand? So something has happened here. A bell has been rung that can't be unrung. So think about this. A false Aslan has been revealed. Now there's this question about, can there be a real Aslan?
A
Right?
lot like the Hebrews in the wilderness.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they get so frustrated so frequently
Right.
and want to go back.
Okay,
Not-
right. Yes.
They're gonna stay in this awful situation.
Yes,
rather than move forward.
right.
It's
Mm.
the fate of the familiar.
Mhm.
You'll
We-
stick with what's familiar rather than go to something new.
Yes. And we also have another breakdown in logic, right? Just because somebody claims to be a king and isn't a king but is crazy doesn't mean that there aren't real kings. Let me say that again. Just because somebody claims they are a king who isn't a king but is in fact insane doesn't mean that there are no real kings. The fact that there's a false Aslan doesn't mean that there's not a real Aslan. And yet for these dwarves, it's actually become a moot point. We're no longer interested in Aslan or children, real or not real. And then, of course, the line, well, he's not a tame lion, comes out, that I could make Aslan appear at my bidding. I mean, that's quite right. Yeah, but the second he says it, not a tame lion, not a tame lion, just what the others kept on telling us. So now that's viewed as, you can say anything under that banner, and it's just another attempt to control us. Right? Marx, religion is the opiate of the people. This is just to keep the masses in line, keep us working and productive. And religion is colluding with that.
It's like they lost their faith, the trust. I'm not trusting this. It's a total lack of faith now.
Right, right.
They're
Which is
walking by sight. It's only what they see.
right.
It's
Well-
even worse than a loss of faith, though, because they go back to what isn't true to
Yeah.
believe in that.
Right.
Like it's not that they're just not accepting the truth of Aslan, they're perpetuating the wrongness of Aslan.
Right. Well, and we will see this carry on throughout the rest of the story, right? To the point where they cannot see what everybody else can see around them. Whether terrifying or beautiful, all they see is the grubby world that they inhabit. So they have now blinded themselves. They are shutting themselves off to anything, truth and lie. So they're in a desperate place. So they reject kings, they reject Aslan. And again, we have to remember that in the medieval Renaissance and even the biblical, there's a sense of order, right? Ordering comes from the heavens down. And so there's a chain of command. That's why obedience is a virtue. Because that is how the good life is distributed to all. If we all live within this chain of command. So they're casting off Aslan, they're casting off the king. We really have then anarchy. People are not going to recognize any authority. There's no authority, no God overhead, no king to execute real justice. Then we've got the Wild West kind of thing, right? Then one of the dwarfs comes back, reminds me of the parable of the 10 lepers. One leper returns to say thank you. So he has the normal Lewis bravery, wants to strike a blow on the right side before all is done, kind of thing. So we have virtue here. This is good. I get back to the tower. They're making a meal. And then Poggin tells his story And now we realize the ginger cat and the Colorman captain have really usurped the position of the ape. But also the cat has used the story of Tyrion's escape to his advantage, similar to the ape, being able to change things very quickly. And so Aslan swallowed up Tyrion is the story. And again, it's fear used to keep the Narnians in line and, strengthen the lie. So again, we have a virtue thing here, right? No honor among thieves. So Shift can't keep his power for very long. Well, it's just about 8:30. So we've got chapter 8. We don't need to go in too much detail. But what we do need to recognize is that there has been an invoking of Tash. And so this great demon comes by, and in his wake comes darkness and death. And so there is more going on than is bargained for. Again, we have that steady, slippery slope that we talked about, right? Like this started out as oranges and bananas for the monkey, then nuts, then money and power, and now we've got a demon headed to the stable. So they have opened a door that they may not be able to shut here.
Is some of it like it always feels like a post, like C.S. Lewis is seeing or experiencing or looking towards like a post-Christian society, and some of like the response to the dwarfs reminds me of some of the message like today, like you guys kind of had your chance as the church. You guys ran the show for a while and not so sure you did a great job, and we're not so sure we're that interested in listening to you anymore.
I think there's some of that. I mean, there's certainly philosophies of the day, right? Like science has usurped the place of religion, the old cosmology in favor of the new cosmology. We have this sense of we don't, even Richard Dawkins, when you listen to him kind of talk, and people will push back, well, why don't you believe in a God that created everything? His first response is always, well, we don't need him. Like we can explain everything apart from God, right? And that's really where a lot of Christians had gotten, was the God of the gaps. So anything science can't explain, we just take full on board everything that science says, and then anything that science can't explain, we say, okay, that's what's left for us. So there's God. We didn't know how that happened. And then of course science continues and reveals that. So yeah, I think there's some of that going on, just the strict materialism, rejection of traditional faith. And he's saying, but what are you left with? What hope do you have? What order does that bring? What good comes of it? So yeah, I think there's some of that going on. Well, I think we'll stop it there, because I'm ready to collapse. We see that the army that they were going to join up with has been destroyed. And so it's that pronouncement, right? He's the last king of Narnia, began chapter 2, and chapter 8, Narnia is no more, is how it finishes. So we are truly now in the last moments of Narnia. So I'm going to stop the video here.